Now, following the news that the Democrats' blue wave has turned into essentially a trickle, the Democrats are now trying to reboot what was an old effective strategy. They are saying that they are going to go after corruption. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's pretty successful. The American people despise corruption. They're not in favor at all of corrupt politicians. And the Republicans have been very successful using the same thing. I mean, what did Donald Trump run on? Drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. I mean, he didn't actually mean it. He said it just played well with the audience. It played well. It plays well with you guys, right? Drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. I thought it was a little corny at first, but now drain the swamp. Okay, well, now the Democrats, they're looking at that and going, that actually works. Maybe, look, it worked in 2006. That's what they ran on before, even though they didn't actually mean it because they didn't do anything to tackle the corruption. But let me get into the details of this first before I get into that. According to the Washington Post, Democrats are now preparing to highlight allegations of corruption surrounding the Trump administration and a legislative agenda to prevent future abuses as they continue rolling out their party platform ahead of November's midterm elections. Well, now that's interesting, right? So, yes, I think that the Democrats should run on not being corrupt? Yeah, of course they should run on not being corrupt. That should be a central tenet of what it is to be a Democrat, a progressive, right? Yes, we are against corruption, and actually in politics, that's a layup. That's a slam dunk. They have literally lowered the basket so you can just drop the ball in. Yes, I am against corruption. Easiest thing to do in politics. And now the Democrats are finally figuring out, you know what we should do? We should run against corruption. Hilarious, right? What other strange things will they do? Will they actually come out in favor of air and water? It would be interesting, right? But anyway. Actually, I do, to be fair, I think they are in favor of air and water, but only in an incrementalist approach must they protect the air and water. I mean, we have to make sure it doesn't hurt the corporations too much. And they can only pollute just a little bit. Lovely. Now, the article continues. With questions about pay-to-play politics swirling around President Trump and his current and former aides, Democrats are set to introduce anti-corruption proposals billed as a, quote, better deal for our democracy. Again, with the better deal, right? We got a better deal. Really, a better deal than what? We got a better deal than Trump. Oh, now that's a low bar. If I've ever seen one, low bar. But anyway, according to a senior Democratic official familiar with the announcement, the new agenda will include proposals that would eliminate loopholes that allow lobbyists and lawmakers to buy and sell influence without the public's knowledge. Now, that, of course, is an answer to Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen was selling access to the president. And so here the Democrats saying, if you're going to sell access to our politicians, we should get to know. How about having them not sell access? Wouldn't that be a way to stop that from happening? I'm just saying. But no, what we're about is just making sure you know how corrupt our politicians are. Oh, great. Thank you. I mean, at least we know how much money they're taking or what they're trying to do, how much access they're selling, et cetera, et cetera. That's great. Now, the message they write, elect Democrats in November to clean up the chaos and corruption in Washington. Hey, look, it sounds great and all. And I'm actually in favor of the idea. But how can Democrats talk about cleaning up the House in Washington when they can't clean up their own area that they're in? They can't clean themselves up. I mean, you want to talk about corruption, the Democrats kind of have a corruption problem too. And for one, the DNC takes lobbyist money, right? They still take PAC money. They still take dark money, independent expenditures. They take money from wealthy donors who do not have the public's best interests in mind or in heart. So, look, let me give you an example. There's a recent story in The Intercept by Zed Jelani. Now, he notes that the senators are giving up relatively little money by swearing off donations from corporate PACs. So this is referring to the recent story where Kamala Harris, and I give her a little bit of credit, and Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand have all decided, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to take corporate PAC money. Okay. Well, the thing is that we find out later that corporate PAC money was actually a pretty small amount of money that they received. And actually most of their money comes from wealthy donors. According to Open Secrets, 10.37% of Cory Booker's campaign funding has come from PACs, 76% of which are from business PACs. By contrast, 72.12% of Booker's funding is from large individual donors. So, meaning PACs actually gave a very small amount to Cory Booker, amount that he can easily get away with. Now, Kirsten Gillibrand, 6.95% of her campaign funding has come from PACs. Of this, 65% is from business PACs. Meanwhile, 62.5% of her funding has come from large individual donors. Kamala Harris, about 4% of her campaign fundraising has been through PACs, and 40% of that has been from business PACs. By contrast, about 65% of her funding has come from large, wealthy donors. I think you kind of understand what the problem here is that, yes, we can go without corporate PAC money because that's not a majority of what we get. We actually get more money from wealthy, rich donors, individual donors. So knowing this, we can see that, yes, while swearing off corporate PAC money is a pretty good gesture, in reality, it's actually kind of empty. Like, they can easily go without that corporate PAC money. Now, another problem here is with this corruption plan is that the Democrats are targeting corruption that is pretty unique to the Trump campaign. I mean, we haven't really heard of it until Trump came into office. Now, Trump is a special level of corruption because it's right out in the open. It's so nakedly brazen and in your face. So now the Democrats are like, I know, we can go after that super obvious corruption, and then we can avoid dealing with our own corruption. It's a winning strategy, let me tell you. It's a winning strategy. Now, one proposal would tighten federal laws governing lobbying disclosures and foreign agent registration. That, of course, again, is related to Michael Cohen. Let's see. The foreign agent registration actually has to do with, I believe, Michael Flynn. Although there are a lot of people in the Trump campaign that are also considered foreign agents, to be fair. So, now, Democrats will propose to change the law so that any lobbying contract would have to be publicly reported. I'm sorry, this is lobbying contact. So, okay. Hey, look, the corruption is happening. Here you go. Now it's just out in the open, but it's still corruption. Wonderful, Democrats. Another proposal could rewrite federal statutes on what that might have allowed lawmakers of both parties to skirt convictions on bribery and pay-to-play allegations. That include former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, former Senator Ted Stevens, and Senator Robert Menendez. All were charged with fraud violations, but then were acquitted or had their convictions overturned after courts found that their actions were not criminal under the current letter of federal law. Now, that last one is actually pretty decent, but none of that really addresses the underlying corruption of the Democratic Party, in both parties, actually. Look, for one, on the Democratic side, you have superdelegates, right? That is a form of corruption. And that's actually one of the biggest things that progressives are angry about, with good reason. It's completely 100% undemocratic and swings primary elections in favor of the establishment support. So that's a problem. Not only that, but both parties are beholden to large corporations and special interests. In fact, that's what the entire point of the Republican Party is, to basically get more money for rich people through tax cuts and deregulation, right? But Democrats have also voted for deregulation and in some cases tax cuts. I mean, look at the recent bill where Democrats voted to eliminate some provisions of Dodd-Frank. I thought they were proud of Dodd-Frank. I thought that was a big signature accomplishment during the Obama administration. Nope. Turns out we're going to work with the Republicans. We're going to work with Donald Trump. And we're going to gut those regulations so that our banker friends can make a little bit more money. Wonderful. Now, look, there's more. Of course, all the money that they receive from these big corporations. A lot of establishment Democrats will use that money to blanket the airwaves with ads in order to crush progressives who don't have any money to get the same exposure. And I want to point to one of the races in West Virginia, for example. Joe Manchin was running against a progressive named Paula Jean Swearengin. You might have not heard of her. Why? Because Joe Manchin basically buried the airwaves in his own ads, while corporate media never talked about Paula Jean at all. She hardly had enough money for ads. Of course, she was relying on small donors, independent donors. She wasn't getting money from super PACs. She wasn't getting money from the coal industry. She wasn't getting money from the Democratic Party, obviously. And so she could not compete in that race with those incredibly large donors. And there are races all over the country where there's a good progressive candidate who's running on things like clean air and clean water and, a living wage and things like that are getting buried by this special interest money. And you'll never be able to hear them. That's the corruption that the Democrats think is fairly normal. And they're not fighting against it at all. Again, as a party, they have mostly embraced that corruption. That's the problem here. And corruption is also sending out Steny Hoyer to try to convince progressive candidates to drop out of their races, or having the DCCC, who's supposed to be neutral, step in and try to influence these local races, often, of course, having it backfire in the case of, for example, Laura Moser and other candidates. You want to talk about corruption? Again, we know the Republican Party is 100% corrupt. That's the point of the party. The Republican Party is there just to funnel money to the rich. We know that. The Democrats are supposed to be better, and they're not. And of course, in running this, we're now totally against corruption, guys, scheme, the Democrats risk being exposed as hypocrites because of their own corruption that they will do nothing to challenge. That, my friends, is the swamp. Look, Americans are tired of big donors and big corporations influencing our elections and influencing and buying off our politicians. We're also sick of arcane bullshit rules that make it so that people who are more of an independent mind or people who are progressive can't go and register to vote in these primaries. We're sick of people hiding polling stations, messing with registrations, making insane deadlines to register, or having party officials being able to pull the strings and put their hands on scales against other candidates that they don't necessarily agree with, and not run a fair contest of ideas. That is corruption. That's the corruption that we're all sick and tired of. And the Democrats will not acknowledge and will definitely not fix because they benefit from that corruption. Trump's corruption is clear. And yes, we do need to do something about that. Of course we do. But you can't just go after his and ignore your own corruption. Because progressive voters and voters across America, they're not buying it. You've got to show that you're against corruption if you want to win people over. And that just doesn't involve flowery language or platitudes. That actually involves doing something. So Democrats, are you just going to give us platitudes? Or are you going to do something? Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.